I have the great pleasure of sharing this panel with a group of colleagues. Before proceeding to ask introducing them all, I will be in very brief terms let you know, as per the program, we have Per Buster with us on the far left. A countryman and a long-time colleague from the evaluation arena, currently serving as, in addition to head of evaluation at NORAD and Norwegian Minister for Affairs, is also the chairman of the OECD DAC evaluation network. My colleague Vijaya Vadivelu, who will be one of our senior evaluators and who's going to be presenting to you the diagnostic guide or framework that we have been working on. Then we have Nina Sarishvili, head of service, policy planning and strategy coordination at the government of Georgia, and on my right, we have Mohammed Munirul Islam, Deputy Chief, General Economics Division of the Planning Commission in Bangladesh. And we have MSc Moa Kofi, Principal District Planning Coordinator, Minister of Local Government and Rural Development in Botswana. And my old friend, Timothy Lubanga, who's the Commissioner of Monitoring and Evaluation Office of the Prime Minister in Uganda.
I'm pleased to be a part of this session on an extremely important but not so easy topic about coming up with a self-assessment tool. My line of thought is the following. Firstly, the SDGs sets out an extremely ambitious agenda that is universal, integrated, and transformable. The aims of the SDGs therefore reinforce the need for cross-cutting and effective governments. Secondly, this implies and should imply in all countries efforts to strengthen the key government functions related to national planning, national budgeting, and delivery of services. Which of course are the key functions of any government. The idea is to facilitate better service provision, more efficient use of resources, more targeted use of funds, and greater accountability. Thirdly, so it moves from the SDGs to the government functions. So thirdly, we need to understand the role of evaluation related to these other government functions. Particularly, the need to understand how evaluation relates to functions like planning, budgeting, auditing, monitoring, reporting. Evaluation, in my view, offers something that's different. It's related, but it's additional to these other government functions. So that's my third point. The fourth point, there have been many efforts over many years to strengthen these key government functions. I'm sure all of us have been part of this. In my country, Norway, an OECD country, we had a big push in the 1980s and 1990s related to, the budget problems, the financial problems we had at that time, the move towards new public management thinking. And then in the development community came the 2000, the introduction of the MDGs. Then we had the aid effectiveness processes with high-level forums on results orientation, on how to have a more effective development. And then the SDGs have come along in this great tradition of many other efforts. And this gives maybe some new perspectives to these whole efforts. But we need to learn from previous efforts in trying to improve budgeting, reporting, etc. My fifth point, there are some common pitfalls when we try to strengthen these functions. One of the pitfalls is that we think we're talking about systems only and not processes. We think we can capture things in systems, and even someone thinks that IT systems is the big solution for many of these challenges. There is a tendency to focus on measurement and on reporting. It's not sufficient understanding of analysis to understand why things are happening or not happening. And of course, there is a limited both demand and supply when it comes to evaluation capacity. My seventh point, I think I've lost the count, but I think my sixth or seventh point is that many of the efforts to strengthen evaluation capacity have come from the outside, pushed by donors like Norway and others, or by multilateral organizations like the MDBs and the UN organizations. I mean, that doesn't work. We cannot push capacity strengthening from the outside. It needs to be a demand from the inside. So these points is why I think this is the right approach. To introduce a self-assessment tool that is not going to give the same answer or the same approach in all countries. It needs to be country-specific. It needs to be understood in the history and the situation in the specific country. And that's why I really support what Vijaya and her colleagues are doing and suggesting in this session. Thank you.
I wish to thank all the participants, to some of whom I've written earlier, for this opportunity to share with you the National Evaluation Diagnostic Guidance and get your perspective on this, because this is very important for us to move forward in revising the guidance and make it available publicly. May I start by asking you, particularly those from the government, if you're using any diagnostic tool at the moment or any capacity development tool currently? No one? So then we are on the right track when we started developing this, and I think we should move forward and finalize this at the earliest. In today's presentation, I'll be focusing on two areas. One is, what does national evaluation capacity strengthening mean in practice? I'll briefly touch upon this and try to provide a quick overview about the National Evaluation Diagnostic Guidance. We provided a flyer of the guidance outside, and the guidance itself is available on the website, and you have a link to that on the flyer, which is available outside this room. You all know this better than us. Like Per mentioned, people providing this guidance is sitting in evaluation offices. The evaluation of national development policies and programs necessitates a holistic approach. And this is not a new insight which SDG is giving us. I think for now we have a shared understanding that evaluation should be nationally led, it should be inclusive and participatory, and it should inform policies, public policy in particular. But what the SDGs is reminding us is about the integrated approach to institutions and development, that development cannot be siloed into projects and interventions if the ultimate goal is sustainable development. The SDGs also remind us, like the plenary session in the morning there was a discussion around it, that it's very important to pay attention to the disadvantaged and the marginalized, and leaving no one behind. I think this reinforcement of some of these principles of development is what SDGs is bringing to the evaluation. And what should evaluation do about this, particularly national evaluations? How should national evaluations address this is very central to when we started doing this guidance. And also, I think the evaluation community has been more fixated with evaluation systems rather than looking at, like Per mentioned, other accountability mechanisms to build on, to further accelerate the pace of the evaluation function in a country as such. So that's another insight we used while we move forward with this guidance. The assessment of national capacities we carried out while developing the guidance points to three areas, three types of capacities. One is, which is fairly well developed, mature capacities, which are very well developed evaluation systems, where the data is very sophisticated, and evaluations are mainstreamed across different institutions. And then we have these evolving capacities where there is an understanding that evaluations are important. There is a selectiveness in conducting evaluations, and also there's a selectiveness in collecting national data. And the last category is this emergent capacities, where they are still in the process of developing the enabling environment for evaluations, and data systems are fairly at an initial stage. So a majority of the countries, I must say, represent the evolving and emergent capacities. So there is an urgent need to do something about this. So what is slowing evaluation capacities in emergent and evolving contexts? At least there are several factors in each of these three categories. Let me start with elaborate on the national evaluation capacity challenges. Countries are yet to prioritize evaluations. Out of about 140 countries, only over 20 of them have national evaluation policies. Very few have entities that would support evaluations in the countries. So the prioritization is yet to happen. Also, limited resources are assigned for evaluations. And even in countries where resources are assigned, they're not dispersed or maybe spent on monitoring rather than on evaluations. Even where there are centralized evaluation systems, we have colleagues from the government who will share the experience, and there are dedicated entities. They may not have the capacity or authority to work across sectors or work at different levels of the government. There remains a lack of attention to institutional arrangements, roles, and coordination mechanisms that are essential for conducting countrywide evaluations. There are several accountability and reporting mechanisms, but evaluations are yet to build on those systems and the data they generate. I would also like to touch upon a bit on the capacity traps. Like any other institutional capacity requirements, there are also capacity traps in developing evaluation systems. You see a wide prevalence of importing standard responses to predetermined problems when there is a lack of basic institutional infrastructure or administrative systems and culture. So how do we get out of this is something we wanted to address in the guidance. And moving to the constraints on using evaluations, there is a poor alignment of evaluation systems and national planning process. Per already mentioned about this. The timing and scope of the evaluation is not aligned with planning and budget cycles. Learning loops and formal processes for using and applying evaluation hardly exist. I'm not going to elaborate on the data challenges, you all know that better. But the point I would like to flag is that often, irrespective of the data quality, most often the data is used for reporting and not to inform public policy or performance. So these are some of the challenges that informed the preparation of the guidance. So what do we mean by diagnostics of national evaluation capacity? What we mean is its unpacking of evaluation requirements through a set of steps to assess key evaluation bottlenecks and specific needs. I would like to emphasize that this is not for some agencies, some UN agency or bilateral agency or consultants to come and do it, but it's for government representatives to do the self-assessment themselves. So that's the whole purpose of this guidance. So it's in a form that anybody can easily apply and assess their entity or central government or local government by themselves. So that's the whole approach we took in this, in developing this guidance. Also, we believe in non-prescriptive approach to account for institutional and other development context differences. And this guidance is primarily for the use of the government entities and other evaluator actors who may support the government. It's a flexible tool that can be applied to ministries or to central government or to local level governments. The idea is that evaluation function should be the whole idea we wanted to emphasize is that the evaluation function need not be always centralized, but it can be located at different levels of the government, and it should be across the different sectoral entities as well. So that way the evaluation culture can develop much more faster. So we hope this guidance will take forward this idea. The guidance recognizes the complexity of national evaluations and its mechanisms, complex set of coordination of actors and actions that interact in a repeated and evolving manner and sometimes unpredictable manner is something we need to account for. That evaluation capacities cannot be developed in an input and output oriented manner in a linear fashion, but it is about designing systems that creates rules and expectations, provides stakeholders with incentives for compliance, and as a consequence, monitors and enforces rules. What is key is that evaluation systems need to be integrated with existing institutional and value practices and that evolve with time. So it promotes a more phased approach to developing evaluation capacities. The guidance will facilitate diagnostics of enabling environment and organizational and institutional capacities. We do not want to go into the assessing the strengths of the personnel, government personnel involved, but focus more on enabling environment and organizational and institutional capacities. We wanted the guidance to respond to countries' preferences for natural evaluation diagnostics. Arild reminds me I have 3 minutes more. I'll try to quicken. We wanted the guidance to respond to countries' preferences for national evaluation diagnostics as against SDG evaluation diagnostics. So the whole premise of this guidance is the interlocking elements, strengthening the interlocking elements of national systems of the government, Agenda 2030, and the evaluation. And we believe that the evaluation capacity should address all these 3 dimensions, and each of them are important in their own way, without overemphasizing on SDGs or one or the other. We developed 5 diagnostic modules, and each of these diagnostic modules have several steps and tools to enable easy self-assessment. Module 1 is on understanding and building enabling environment for national evaluation systems. This covers the contextual factors that shape the enabling environment for evaluation and helps to identify paths that would facilitate and accelerate national evaluation capacities. It provides examples of accelerator paths, peer and South-South collaboration, which we saw in South Africa, autonomous constitutional evaluation function in Mexico, and so forth. There are several examples the guidance provides. One of the areas we specifically address is the collaboration with constituencies with comparable objectives, for example, audit systems. In many countries, audit mechanisms are fairly well developed compared to evaluation. National evaluation, instead of creating boundaries, should leverage on the collaboration with accountability institutions. We do recognize that the need for structured evaluation practice cannot be universally assumed. Evaluations have benefit, but they also bear costs, time, money, and effort. There is likely to be hesitance to invest scarce resources into formal evaluative practices if current arrangements satisfy countries' need for information, accountability, and legitimacy. In these cases, the tools enable exploring different options and scenarios. So module 2 is on assessing the value added of evaluation to national and SDG planning. The module is about taking stock of national prioritization of SDG framework, mainstreaming of SDGs in ministries, departments and agencies, and at national level, balancing sectoral priorities versus integrated agenda, and setting up and empowering coordination mechanisms. Module 3 provides instruments for diagnosing existing evaluation capacities. The focus is on enabling ownership throughout the process, leveraging the process for capacity development, awareness raising, and information sharing. Several examples of national evaluation function are provided. Module 4 is on institutionalizing and strengthening national and local evaluation capacities. The module underscores that evaluation capacity should be phased, adapted to local context, and be accompanied by commitment of resources. It also addresses how to avoid capacity traps. Attention is brought to linkages with data systems and building on existing accountability systems. And the last module is on integrating SDG specificities into evaluation practices. Traditional areas of national evaluation capacity development efforts already account for country leadership, rigor, learning, and so forth. The 2030 Agenda, however, outlines the programming principles such as sustainability, resilience, equality, partnerships, and leave no one behind. The evaluation system should capture progress on this. The modules clarifies new expectations to ensure the integration of appropriate evaluation approaches and questions and values into evaluation plans and methodologies. In conclusion, I wish to state that we do recognize that the guidances can often fall into, can join the array of unused tools and reports. We wanted this self-assessment tool to be more user-friendly and easy to use. So what we wanted to, towards this effort, we are developing an online tool which can facilitate government entities to do the self-assessments much more easily. So this discussion, we would like to get your thoughts on how we can make it much more user-friendly. And we would like to work with you in the coming months before we finalize the guidance as well as the online tool, and look forward to working with you. Thank you very much.
So what I would like to focus here is the problems and the main challenges we faced when we started to nationalize the SDGs. As the administration of the government and the unit I represent and I'm heading, we were the ones who coordinated the whole nationalization process. And we're the ones who coordinate the policy planning process within the government. And we do also provide the standard setting when it comes to the monitoring and evaluation. When we started to nationalize the SDGs, we worked with every single governmental institution and with other partners as well to identify the priorities and to come up with the baselines. It's evident that you can't track the progress of the policy if you don't study the baseline and if you don't have the baseline indicators. And it's of course impossible to track the progress if you don't have the high quality data-based indicators towards which you are trying to achieve. What we found out during the work is that most of the institutions, they had a huge data gaps when we were trying to identify the baseline indicators. For example, we found out that we had no accurate data on how many families and the people had access to clean water. We had, of course, some data, but the data was not accurate. What we also found out during this exercise was that the institutions lacked the capacity to make adequate projections. So even though they had some baseline data, but they had shortcomings in making particular projections in 5 years' time, because we tried to make target indicators for 2020, 25, and 2030. And it was really difficult for them to make projected indicators, especially when it comes to the disaggregated data by gender, by age, and etc. We also found out that in general there is a huge data gap, and we have talked about it during the other sessions as well, but there is also the disaggregated data is not available, especially when it comes to the gender, for example. What we also found out during this exercise was the lack of the capacity of the institutions. They had a lot of willingness to have the data, but they lacked the capacity. And we found out that the existing data collection systems that we have in the country, in fact, they don't correspond to the SDGs requirements. And they need to be readjusted and reformulated in order to produce the data that is needed to measure the progress that has to be done in terms to achieve the sustainable development goals. How we tried to solve the problem, the first is that we developed the monitoring and evaluation framework that is obligatory for the governmental institutions as it is approved by the Prime Minister's order. But as I've mentioned in the beginning, it's just a guidance document that helps the ministries to understand how the monitoring and evaluation should be conducted. We also tried to, at some stage, enhance the policy planning and policy development system in the country. And for example, we asked all the governmental institutions to identify the policy units, the units who are responsible to develop the policies and then to monitor and evaluate the progress. And as we have identified those units, now we are trying to raise their capacity, to increase their capacity. And in fact, the UNDP is our major partner in this regard, as we're planning the cycles of the trainings that have to be delivered to these policy units to increase their evaluation capacities. And finally, I would like to say the few words that we have in terms of different sectoral strategies. Different ministries who oversee the particular areas, for example, the Ministry of Agriculture and also the Anti-Corruption Direction, they have their own methodologies when it comes to evaluating the progress of the sectoral strategies. And they sometimes do use the external partners' data, like the civil society organizations' data. They use shadow reports produced by the civil society organizations in order to track the progress and to compare the data provided by the governmental organizations with the data that is provided by the civil society and watchdog organizations, and to see what the discrepancies are. And they come up with the final findings based on the analysis of these two different sources of information. And we're also trying to push the government organizations to utilize more civil society organization data and more international survey and index data that is available currently. We are also actively working with the National Statistics Office in order to increase the data capacities. But as I have mentioned, in the SDGs area, what the SDGs nationalization process showed us that we have to completely readjust the data systems. And as we often say, SDGs caused the data revolutions in a lot of countries, and Georgia is not the only country in this respect. So this was very briefly the reflection. Thank you.
Good evening. This is indeed a great opportunity for me on behalf of the government of Bangladesh. I'm just showing you the linking evaluation system and national and local SDG planning. That I belong to Bangladesh Planning Commission, so my focus would be what we are doing at this moment with regard to SDG issues. So you see that, let me say that the National Monitoring and Evaluation System of Bangladesh, you see at the global level, we have the Sustainable Development Goal, and at the national level, we have at this moment in our hands, the flagship document is the 7th 5-year plan. And the very beneficial for Bangladesh is the timing. When our 6th 5-year plan was in the end, MDG was in the terminal year, and when we were preparing the 7th 5-year plan, we had the opportunity to have the draft version of the SDGs. So In our 7th 5-year plan, we have identified 15 priority areas, and many of the priority areas you can see that they are aligned with the SDGs majority of this. So we have the 15 priority areas in the 7th 5-year plan, and these were that way they are definitely belongs to the SDG goals. And definitely after that, each ministry or divisions in the planning commission context, we have sectoral policies or strategies. Say in the health ministry, we have health policy, education and the education policy. And then below that, we have the annual performance agreement of the line ministries. So in line with the accountability framework, the government has to agreement with the cabinet and the secretary of the concerned ministry come up with an agreement that in the next 1 year, what activities will be done by that particular ministry, and they will come up with an evaluation structure in the next 1 year. So they are, the ministries are marked on their performance of their implementation status. Definitely in the development budgets, we have the annual development program or the development budgets, and everywhere I will show you that there are the indicator levels. Say in the SDGs, we have 232 indicators at this moment, and for the 7th 5-year plan of our own national development plan, we have 88 development results frameworks in the 15 priority areas. And you see in the annual performance agreement, we have key performance indicators for all the important issues that will be implemented in the next year. And definitely with respect to development budgets, we have development projects, and each development projects have their own M&D indicators, and that is monitored by a special implementation monitoring and evaluation division under the Ministry of Planning. So if you see that when the SDGs coordination of, since we all know that the coordination would be a very complex and very instrumental for the implementation of SDGs. So we can see that we have an amalgamation from the Prime Minister's Office and the Planning Commission. From the Prime Minister's Office, we have an SDG Implementation and Monitoring Committee where there are 21 secretaries are there, and the Principal Coordinator SDG Affairs has been created a new post in the Prime Minister's Office with the rank of a Principal Secretary. And so, Planning Commission has been given the responsibility of the Secretariat of that committee. So that from the Prime Minister's Office, they have their execution and the power and just to exert issues. And in the Planning Commission context, we will do all the policy planning and this related or research related activities. And definitely from this way, it will be apprised to the Honorable Prime Minister and ultimately to the Cabinet what we have done in the coming years. So you see that in the if you in the M&E concept, you see the for every ministries for the implementation of the SDGs, we have done divided the ministries into lead, co-lead, and associate based on their implementation responsibility level, and they also provided information to us. And also we have local consultative group taking representative from the development partners, NGO, CSOs there, and they provide information to the NSO, National Statistical Office, and definitely we have developed an SDG tracker, and ultimately discussing with the stakeholder consultation, ultimately we have prepared the, this year we have prepared the voluntary national review, and every year we will prepare the SDG Progress Report. So you see that the alignment of our 7th 5-year plan with the SDGs issues. As I mentioned earlier, the timing was very good. So we can say that 82% of the SDG goals are aligned with our 7th 5-year plan. Though with the target level, the ratio becomes lower. At least 34% is fully aligned, and 38 targets are partially aligned. And what the government action in doing? So you see the first of all, we have identified the SDG mapping. Who to do what? Based on that, we have identified lead, co-lead, and associate ministries, and then we have done the SDG data gap analysis. And based on that, we can say that we can identify out of the 232 indicators, 70 indicators data is readily available in our country, and 108 data is partially available, and 63 indicators data is not at all available in our country's context. So this is the challenging part. And then by this time, we have already identified SDG financing strategy. That is how much resources will be required from 2017 to 2030 for full implementation of SDG in our country. And definitely we have come up with a draft with the M&D framework. And each year we are going to have identified in the M&D framework 3 phases. That is by 2020, which will be the end period of 7th 5-year plan, and by 2025, which will be the end period of 8th 5-year plan, and by 2030, which will coincide with the end period of 9th 5-year plan and the SDG as well. So 3 successive 5-year plan will be required for the full implementation of SDG in our country's contracts, and we have developed a so we are in the process of whole society approach. We're discussing with the NGO, CSO, civil society, all are going on. Here is the SDG mapping. As I mentioned you earlier, that 43 ministries has been identified as lead, 34 as co-lead, and 61 ministry, division, and institution, independent institution itself, are considered as co-lead. And definitely Ministry of Environment Forest would be the major responsibility, as SDG 12, 13, 14, 15 belong to Ministry of Environment Forest. You see, SDG action plan, based on the, as you have identified that you are the lead, they have been now given responsibility to come up with an SDG action plan by 2020, which projects ultimately will be taken by that particular ministry for the full implementation of SDG up to 2020 and then 22 to 30. So at this level we have identified, and not only the projects, we are also interested to see whether any policy changes or strategy changes or rules changes will be required by the concerned ministry. Here we can see the SDG data gap analysis, and you see that how challenging is that, particularly SDG 12, 13, 14 and 15. You see 69% data of SDG 13 is not available. 57% data of SDG 13 is not available. 60% data of SDG 14 is not available in our country, and definitely you see the challenging part, 12, 13, 14. We have identified that the indicators that were in the MDGs are now continuing in the SDGs, their availability is better. But the indicators which has been newly included in the SDGs, they are definitely very challenging part. And you see, this is the SDG need assessment and financing strategy. And here we have identified around 1 trillion additional financing would be required for the full implementation of SDG in our country's context, based on the constant 2015-16 prices. And we have also identified how much amount will come from the government, how much amount will come from the private sector, NGO, CSO, these levels, and definitely from also the external sectors. And here you see that we have developed an web-based data repository system for the result-based M&E system in our country, and it has already been developed in consultation with all the stakeholders, and definitely all the ministries, particularly the lead ministries, in consultation with its associate and co-leads, have to provide data. We have identified the NSOs as the who would be the number one data producer, and side by side the sectoral ministry, they themselves also produces data for the monitoring of their own program. So not the data will be generated by the NSO and also the data producing institutions, but there would be a check and balance in between them. The NSO in line with all consultation. So there the statistical coordination body has been developed by this time. So by authentication, it will be available to the on-site or online, so that the every citizens can watch whether we are online or we are on track or off track. Side by side, we have already identified the challenges as well. You see, disaggregation of data, which is ultimately provide us the who is left behind, is definitely a challenging part. And survey methodology has been developed, has to be developed to convert the partially available data into a fully available data. Because you identified what is the partially available in the existing data generation system, this level of survey is produced or going on. And in the next round, if we just produce one or two questions in the next round, then the SDG related data will be available. And also in the raw data, there is information, but in the final data, it was not. So we have to have analysis for the raw data, so that the new SDG indicators will be available. So this level of analysis should be required, and for that reason, we need assistance from the expert level, particularly in the questioning preparation. And the challenging part is that many of the indicators related data will come from the administrative sources. So the administrative sources data and the official data has some particular difference. So there will be challenging how the administrative data can be converted into an official data. And understanding of the methodology, metadata, you see many of the metadata is still yet to be finalized. So definitely we need institutional capacity, capturing administrative data, for which institutional capacity has to be developed, frequency of data generation. You see some data are generated every 5 years. So with a view to monitoring in a practical way, we have to increase the frequency of data. Appropriate human resource development would be required, and institutional leakage with on NSO. You say NSO would be the major data producer, but not the main. In sectoral level, we have also data. So the interlinkage between the NSO and other data producing institution has to be strengthened, and we have to ensure availability, authentic and reliable data. So capacity development, with the capacity development, and the NSO's capacity development has to be ensured, and also the ministry or division or agency levels capacity development has also need to be ensured. And definitely we need based on the South-South and North-South or triangular cooperation, we are interested to have lessons learned from best practices, and international cooperation definitely would be required, and with respect to financing, technology, logistics, and human capital. I think I have done my work.
Let me greet all of you this afternoon. As mentioned, I'm Ian Mwakufi from the beautiful Republic of Botswana. I'm going to give you Botswana's approach in terms of implementation of the SDGs, including monitoring and evaluation systems. And first of all, moderator, let me make mention that the government of Botswana has demonstrated a very strong political will and commitment in terms of implementation of the SDGs. You will realize that I'm not going to make a presentation, I'm a speaker, so I'm going to speak on the matter. This was done through its national development priorities that were articulated in the country's Vision 2036, which is a 20-year plan, the 11th National Development Plan 11, as well as District Development Plan 8, as well as the Urban Development Plan 4. It is also necessary for me to mention that there is also the National Strategy for Sustainable Development, which is currently being drafted and will be completed in the next month. With all these draft frameworks geared towards sustainable development in place and awaiting approval, it is a clear indication that Botswana has great commitment in terms of implementation of the SDGs through its national agendas. This also provides a very strong basis for Botswana to implement all these agendas. Ladies and gentlemen, to successfully support implementation of all these SDGs, a well-designed and coordinated as well as coherent approach was important to come up with, which was done through the leadership of the government of Botswana, and it has been adopted through the assistance of the development partners in Botswana. The process leading to this has also been institutionalized in our day-to-day activities and has tried as much as possible to involve all the relevant players, hence fulfilling the statement of leaving no one behind. It is on this basis, ladies and gentlemen, that the country is finalizing a roadmap that will be used to implement and evaluate as well as monitor the SDGs. This roadmap will be, it will actually be launched on the 23rd of November, which shows that it's a convenient time that it would actually happen after this conference. Coincidentally, ladies and gentlemen, when the 2030 agenda was being formulated, at the same time, Botswana was in the process of reshaping its mid-term development plans as well as the short-term development plans, which I mentioned earlier, that are referred to the Vision 2036, the 11th development plan. For the district is the 8th development plan, and for our local level players is for the urban development players is the urban development plan 4. And I should overemphasize that these are the main development frameworks through which Botswana domesticates and mainstreams the SDGs. Actually, Botswana has domesticated and integrated and mainstreamed the SDGs through these processes. I should also like to mention it to this house that planning in Botswana is not a sectoral approach anymore, but we use what we call thematic working groups. It is the same thematic working groups that were involved in the preparation of all these national development agendas that I talked about. The frameworks are anchored around social upliftments, dealing with social upliftment issues, economy and employment, sustainable environment, and the last one is government safety and security. Equally so, in these preparations were also spearheaded by the same thematic working groups. You can see how a lot of players were involved in terms of integrating and localizing the SDG agenda in the country. I should also make mention that these TWGs comprised, the thematic working groups are referred to as TWGs. They comprised of the private sector, national players, civil society, women groups, private sector, development partners, citizens, youth groups, academia, as well as research institutions that are available in the country. I should also indicate that the same arrangement was used at local level in terms of preparations of the local development plans. In the same vein, strengthening the national data system and evaluation system was also ongoing in order to strengthen implementation of these plans and their global agenda through the national data custodians known as Statistics Botswana and the National Strategy Office. The National Statistics Office has also developed a national strategy for improving all statistics within the national statistics system. I should also indicate at this point in time that statistics and data from other relevant organizations are also included in terms of statistics in the country. Through the domestication agenda into the national and sub-national levels or the development frameworks, a lot has been done in Botswana to some extent of coming up with an evaluation system. Currently, the policy on monitoring and evaluation has been adopted by Parliament, and the country is currently coming up with what we call a national monitoring and evaluation system, which will be geared simultaneously in terms of supporting the monitoring, reporting, and evaluating all the national agenda, as well as the sustainable development goals. It is our belief that in so doing, our efforts have been made in terms of domesticating the SDG targets and indicators, as well as developing a baseline for the SDG indicators that will establish and inform this national monitoring and evaluation system. A lot was done in terms of incorporation and synergy with the other statistics, like I mentioned earlier on. And to achieve all these distinguished goals, appropriate institutional structures and frameworks are still needed in terms of making fully operational and fit for purpose, as well as supporting this agenda. Hence, as a result, the formation of the roadmap, the evaluation system, as well as involving all players in planning, implementing, monitoring, reporting, as well as evaluating the process and implementing the process. A lot of effort was also put in terms of implementation of the SD agenda, in terms of advocacy, awareness campaigns, and several dialogues and sessions were undertaken by the government in collaboration with the United Nations Development System, both at the national level and at the local level, which included national governmental organizations, community-based organizations at the local level. This was to make sure that everybody is involved and information trickles down even to the lowest level in the country. I've mentioned earlier on that at the same time, the National Monitoring and Evaluation System process also began as a way to fully integrate all these agendas, to fully integrate evaluation into the national planning system, and the monitoring and evaluation system is yet to be adopted by Parliament. To support all the implementation of these agendas, and at the forefront, the SDGs, the country has set up various structures in terms of supporting implementation under the guidance and the leadership of the government of Botswana through the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development. This is called the National Steering Committee, which is chaired by the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development and the United Nations Development Program in the country. The National Stakeholders Committee is also supported by a fully strengthened secretariat, which is also referred to as the Technical Task Force, which also has different players and different members who are involved in terms of the SDGs and the national implementation agenda. In terms of the advocacy and communication, civil society and SDG ambassadors were also very important players who were used for advocacy and sensitization and the interventions of the SDGs. In parallel to that process of raising awareness and advocacy, putting in place an effective coordination structure and having in place strong national preparations in various areas to implement the SDGs at national level was done, ladies and gentlemen. At the local level, we currently now have annual development plans that have included the SDGs, which are then monitored and evaluated at the level of the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development, which is the one that actually coordinates development planning efforts at the local level. I must also indicate that effective governance and cooperative governance at both national and local levels to establish these priorities were used in terms of integrating and aligning all the SDGs to all these development plans that I talked about. What is required currently in terms of completing the evaluation process is to make sure that the National Monitoring and Evaluation System is completed and put into full use. We also require that financial resources are actually put more in terms of budgetary allocations to support evaluation and implementation of all these plans. I should also indicate that the national agenda, the global agenda, the SDGs, has been translated into the local language, which is Setswana. This is to make sure that even players at the local level are also able to realize and to participate in the implementation and evaluation of this global agenda. This was in line with making sure that integration and domestication and localization are done at all levels in the country, without leaving out the local level. In terms of data monitoring, reporting, and evaluation, the country is also in the process of developing a national indicator framework, baseline assessment that will help in identifying data gaps, as well as recommending possible data sources and the way forward in terms of evaluation. The commitment, therefore, of leaving no one behind and tackling inequality and discrimination in the SDGs will require going beyond average to target efforts towards reaching all the groups in the country if we are to implement, monitor, and evaluate the SDGs. It also goes without saying that we need to develop a set of localized indicators that will cover all players. The indicators will be used to monitor and assess the national and the local development plans. I should also mention it at this point that our local level implementation is actually monitored at the local level by a committee referred to as the District Development Committee, which is geared towards all development efforts at the local level. We are also to ensure that information gathered at the local level is used in national monitoring, reporting, and evaluation processes. We are also intending to implement the integrated and monitoring and evaluation system, which considers both the national and local level context. And this will be done through rapid evaluations, where we will pick a few sectors or a few ministries where we will conduct the evaluations. We also intend to enable and facilitate participation of local authorities and wider stakeholders, including development partners, citizens at grassroots level, people with disabilities, youth and women organizations in terms of evaluating the agenda, as well as media, academia, and research institutions. As a country, we will also ensure that achievements and evaluations at the local level are recognized and made part of the national SDG progress reporting, and also undertake regular reporting on the SDGs with key focus on key results achieved at the national and local levels, as well as defining solutions to off-track goals, targets, and indicators. As a way of ending, Madam Chair, maybe when you evaluate who you are to roll out to, maybe consider Botswana, because a lot has actually been done on the ground. I rest my case. Thank you very much.
So some of the achievements we have realized over the years was as a result of his recommendations at that time. So I'm sure he's keen to also kind of evaluate to what extent we followed those recommendations. Okay, the presentation has has 4 parts, and I will start straight away. So in terms of the environment for the national M&E system, we have a national M&E framework which is guided by a policy. I think when Vijaya was presenting, she said about 20 out of 100 something countries have policies. So we are lucky to be one of those whose M&E framework is driven by a policy, whose objective is mainly to improve the design, management, and assessment of policies and programs. So the key elements of that are a government performance assessment system. We have a very robust government performance assessment system developed over time that has been scaled up both at the central and local government. And so we have a comprehensive 6-monthly review of the performance of the whole of government, which is quite well established now. But on evaluations, we have a government evaluation facility, and that's, we suffer from the same disease that has been raised here since morning, that we have much more development on the M and kind of less development on the E. But we are making efforts through establishing a facility, and that evaluation facility has 4 main components. It has an evaluation agenda. So what we do is the highest policy-making organ of government approves an evaluation agenda, which includes 10, 15, 20 topics of the national flagship projects and programs and policies that government wants evaluated in a particular year. The second component of the facility is a fund. So we have a fund, and every donor that would like to contribute to evaluation in the country is required or requested to contribute either by placing money in that fund or by making a commitment to fund evaluations within that fund. And then we have, and of course, government increasingly puts resources in the fund. And then we have a powerful evaluation committee and evaluation database established as part of the government evaluation facility. So this is a committee comprised of selected individuals from professional institutions, from key government ministries, from the private sector, the academia, the civil society, and donors. And the role is really to oversee and drive the evaluations that we do in the country, provide quality control, and guide the evaluations that we undertake. And the fourth element is an evaluation standards and guidelines. So we want every evaluation that is undertaken in the country, whether at the sector level, local government level, or central government level, to be driven by national evaluation standards and evaluation guidelines, but particularly for the public sector. The M&E system is closely linked with the budget monitoring system in the Ministry of Finance. Of course, it is fed by statistics from the Bureau of Statistics, and it is guided by the National Development Plan. So all policies and programs must be in the National Development Plan and must be prioritized for evaluation for that particular year. And we also work closely with the VOPE, and in our case, it is the Uganda Evaluation Association, and we do quite a number of capacity building activities jointly, as I will explain later. And of recent, we are now engaging the parliamentary platform on M&E. That's very important for us because Parliament was kind of disjointed from this process. But now we are increasingly interesting Parliament, and it is helping us increase the demand for evaluations in the country. So, for SDGs in particular, we have a proposed coordination framework, and I'm saying proposed because elements of it has been operationalized, but some elements are yet to be put into practice. So at the highest level, we have an SDGs Policy Coordination Committee. So the intention here is that you don't leave cabinet ministers out of the process, because if it is not driven right from that highest level of the head of state, then it is lost. And so we have a policy committee at the highest level of cabinet ministers. And then we have an SDGs Implementation Steering Committee. These are director generals. So you want the Director General, or in our case we call them permanent secretaries of all the ministries, because SDGs are so robust. There is nobody who is not part of the SDG across government. Everybody has some role or some function to play, are members of that committee. And then we have a task force. And the task force are the troops on the ground, the people like me and so on, who have to ensure that the actual implementation takes place. And in order for the task force to operate, we divided that task force into 5 technical working groups. So that table summarizes what technical working groups exist and what they are composed of. The largest is the coordination, monitoring, evaluation, and reporting. And I think it has been explained here since the opening of the conference, the importance of bringing everybody together, the fact that it is involving a broad spectrum of stakeholders, and therefore, unless adequate coordination mechanisms are put in place, we will not be able to deliver on the very ambitious and comprehensive targets and indicators of the SDGs. So the Prime Minister's office, therefore, leads on the coordination and the monitoring and evaluation function. But we have a very big role for the planning unit, the National Planning Authority, and then we have a specific technical working group working on data. To address all the indicators and targets under the SDGs, we have to have special energy injected in the National Statistics Bureau just to ensure that we cover all the data gaps. And then we have a communication and advocacy technical working group, as well as financing and budgeting. So, what are some of the measures we have undertaken to strengthen and institutionalize evaluation capacities? The first is to do a comprehensive assessment of the national standard of the national indicators, to develop a set of national standard indicators for monitoring the national development plan. So like Georgia and like several other countries, we also believe in mainstreaming, not running a parallel mechanism for implementing and managing SDGs, but to mainstream. And so we have established an indicator compendium which defines all the national development plan indicators, but also all the SDGs indicators. And this framework is therefore going to be used for measuring the normal performance of business in government, as well as performance of government in fulfilling and meeting the SDG targets. However, like many other countries have reported, we have established a lot of data gaps, and I have explained how we have a technical working group to do that, to deal with that. We have also undertaken the alignment of the existing National Development Plan and SDG indicators, just like our colleagues from Pakistan did. And we have a good percentage of alignment, about 58% level of alignment, but that's only slightly over 50. So we still have a whole, more or less half, that is not aligned to the SDG requirements. And we have planned a number of training activities, and I would like to invite Vijaya and the team, as part of completing the diagnostics of the tool, that we would welcome a training opportunity on that tool, because that would help us also build capacity in understanding how the tool actually can be used for building capacity for SDGs implementation. And my last slide is on what we think we should do next. One, we need to provide a platform for dialogue, advocacy, and knowledge. And the point here is that actually sometimes we do lots of work technically, develop these frameworks and systems and so on, but we don't communicate it enough to the public. And so, because SDGs require the participation of everybody, every stakeholder, the citizens, the civil society, the private sector, and so on, we would like to have a very strong advocacy plan so that we bring everybody on board to make the contribution that they can make. Secondly, is to strengthen capacity of institutions and evaluators to conduct, commission, and manage evaluations, especially for SDGs. And we are saying this because we still have inadequacies, even in terms of the number of evaluators that exist in the country, the number of companies, institutions that are able to win contracts to undertake these evaluations. And then the skills levels, the capacity. For example, impact evaluations are still difficult and we don't have enough impact evaluation evaluators in the country that can adequately meet the demand that is being generated by this exercise. And the third is to promote effective evaluation practices to improve evidence-based policy making, particularly for the attainment of SDGs. Just the fact that we need to commission. As a result of implementation of SDGs, we will need to scale up the amount of evaluations that we are going to undertake. And in that case, that demand will require a lot of effort to strengthen our institutions. And finally, is to introduce the diagnostic tools for evaluation capacities. And I think Vijaya's presentation is a direct response to that requirement. We need new tools. We have been informed here that there is new thinking on the methodologies that we should use, on the approaches that we should use. And so we welcome the introduction of new approaches, new tools, new energies, so that we are able to do things better. And of course, to mobilize additional resources for particularly rigorous evaluations at sector level. Evaluations are under budgeted for. Sometimes they are an afterthought, and many times there is even no directly responsible official at the sector level responsible for evaluations. This is something in the Ugandan context we are establishing. We are now creating a position for an M&E officer at every government department, but that is just a starting point. So we would like to engage more in the budgeting process so that we ensure that we have more resources allocated for evaluations. That's it, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much to Mr. Lubanga, and again for sharing with us the experience of Uganda and for the recognition of how even in a country which has had a focus on national monitoring and evaluation capacity for quite some time, the realization that there is still opportunities for further improvement and calibration of the national evaluation system. Before turning to the floor for a round of eventual reflections or questions for the panelists, I just did want to allow me flash the guidance tool that Vijaya has referenced. It is going to be available for some initial sharing. It will be further refined then as we're looking for a full piloting and launch of this. Meanwhile, the floor is open we won't have, I'm afraid, time for many reflections or questions. I'll take 3 or 4, and then we'll run the panel in responding to those as best possible and within the availability of time.
Very short comment, building on Ricardo's point about the process and taking one step at a time. I think the approach that Vijaya is suggesting is also to have to develop and to learn as we build the processes and systems. So I think that's an excellent good point to remember. I'm a bit worried when I see some of these graphs about all these elements in the huge system. So I think that's something to think about.
Thank you, Vijay. Again, only briefly in the interest of time.
Thank you. I think all the points are well taken. Just I would like to add one thing. I think when countries are starting off to strengthen their systems, it need not always take years for that to happen. They can be sometimes it can happen fast, sometimes it takes years. But I think one should hope that there are ways to accelerate that process. And what are those entry points which we can speeden up some of these strengthening of the institutions to occur. So that's all I wish to say. Because morning, one of the sessions we saw that there's a projection that for this it takes 50 years, for this 80 years. I think in today's current policy world, when countries are connected, it should not take that long. We can learn from OECD countries and fast track it.
Nina.
Just a small comment about the additional resources that was mentioned. I would say that we do need additional resources in order to develop the skills that are needed to evaluate the progress. We do need additional resources in order to fill out the data gaps, in order to develop the data collection systems that would correspond to the SDG requirements. So this is just a brief comment about the additional resources. Why do we need them?
Thank you. Mohammed?
Thank you. First question about the indicators level. Yes, as I mentioned in my presentation that our second intervention with the SDG was the data gap analysis, the context of our country. And with respect to at that time when we were exercising that, at that time there was 241 indicators, and in true sense it was 230. As you all know that there are repeated indicators in the SDGs, and at the time we could found that we had a series of consultation among all the data producing agencies of our country, and we could find that out of 241 at that time, meaning that in the existing data generation system, that level of indicators related data was available, was the survey is going on indicators. So some modification in the new, some changes to be examined or process should be there. So capacity should be developed in that way. So this is the understanding from the SDG data gap analysis from our country's context. And 63 indicators data was not available. That is, existing data generation system never ever produced any indicators related to this data. Particularly say the environment and climate change issue, as I mentioned in my presentation, you will see that SDG 12, 13, 14, 15, around 60% indicators data is not available in the existing data generation system of our country. So this is the challenging task. We are speaking about the leave no one behind or disaggregated data. Even the national aggregated data is not available, as I should say. So that challenging part definitely would be, first of all, you come up with the availability of data, then you go for the disaggregation. You see 60% data SDG related 12, 13, 14, 15 is not available. And additional resource, yes, additional resource is definitely required because see, Bangladesh is not only for the amount, as they mentioned, is not only for the data generation, it is the whole amount for the full implementation of SDGs from 2017 to 2030. So based on the expectation that how much you can understand that the GDP growth rate for an LDC and GDP growth rate has to be more than 7 and plus. So in our 7th 5-year plan, we have identified that by 2020 our GDP growth rate will be 8. But SDG indicator is per capita GDP growth, and it has to be more than 7% by 2030. So with the beauty generating more GDP growth, we need definitely more investment, and that will also require from ODI, and definitely other sources from private and public and this way. So you can see that in the infrastructure level, say SDG 19, World Bank study says that a country like Bangladesh additionally usually every year needs 10 to 12 billion additional investment for infrastructure development, where we are investing on 5 to 6 billion dollars. So you see that there is huge gap. So in every goal we have come up with how much additional resources would be required for the full implementation of SDG. So in that respect, we have the amount was huge, but then we come up with an synchronized approach. That is, you all know that many indicators or many goals are interrelated in the SDGs. So say the SDG 8, the growth and employment. If the growth and employment is fully implemented, then it has an inflection, a reflection in SDG 1, it has reflection in SDG 2, it is reflection in SDG 10. So we have come up with synchronized method, and the amount required has come down to a slower pace. We have an experience for the MDGs. In the MDGs era, so our estimation was that Bangladesh would require 5 billion additional ODA for the full implementation of SDG, but we could get $1.76 billion in the last 25 years. So since when our economic growth was growing for last 15 years, our GDP growth is around 6%, and in the last 7 or 8 years, our GDP has more than doubled, and by this time ODA has also increased. So the level we are increasing, the definite difference will definitely lower down. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. Yeah, please.
Thank you very much for the question that was referred to Botswana. Regarding the issue of more resources, why more resources would be required. I guess it goes without saying that if we have a new agenda, it's clear more needs to be done in terms of advocacy, capacity building, technical capacities, and it will be clear that more resources, especially in terms of time and budget, should be added to the normal budget. Also, it's clear to everyone here that resources are never enough. So if you actually have something to implement, more resources, yes, would be a bonus to make sure that you fully implement. Over and above that, when we implement our plans, we have what we call a midterm review. If we conduct midterm reviews that are done in the middle, especially after 2 or 3 years after implementation, you might require new projects, new programs, new activities that would actually be meeting the SDG indicators or targets. So I guess it's well explanatory why we would need more resources in that regard. Thank you.
Timothy?
Actually, it's all answered, but maybe just in 30 seconds. I think one of the comments was to the effect that, aren't we asking for too much in light of the demands of the SDGs and maybe the level of development of these systems in some of the countries? I think what I would like to just add to the response my colleagues provided is that, yes, the task is big, but it can be done. And I think in each country's case, they have identified what it takes, whether it is reforming the system, whether it is rethinking the M&E, whether it is bringing it, putting more priority in it, whether it is capacity building, whether it is investment in data systems and so on. I think it can be done. I think the fact that we are mainstreaming SDGs in the working practice, even at the time of MDGs, initially it was thought the targets were too far for some of the countries, but some of the MDGs were met much, much earlier than actually anticipated. So in a nutshell, I think it can be done. What we need to do is more energy, more rethinking, more reforms, so that we are better prepared to monitor and evaluate SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not going to seek to sum up in any comprehensive manner, but I'm going to take the prerogative of moderator or session chair just to make a couple of points. I think in some respects speaking to some of the issues raised, and it comes out of a point raised by Mr. Islam, if I understood presentation correct, namely order of magnitude. Was it $963 billion? That was the resource volume we were talking about for Bangladesh, admittedly a very large country. We know in the Addis Ababa process in the run-up to the SDGs, $15 trillion was the kind of resource envelope that was being raised. And let us just be clear about one thing. The ODA money, the development cooperation money, is very small and it's not going to be getting any bigger. One thing we have been at some risk of having, I'm talking now as part of a UN agency or development cooperation kind of actor, we have been at risk of putting ourselves in the trap of somehow bringing our own unique jurisdictional accountability requirements, namely the evaluation rules that apply to our organization. And we come and we bring it to developing countries and say, hey, doesn't this make sense for you too? No, that's not how national evaluation capacity has to be framed around an understanding of the national order, whatever it is, however complex it is, but the national resource base and resource flows and decision making that pertains maybe above all. And so allow me this then purely on account of my own understanding, but as some sort of words in attempt to give a certain closure to this discussion. As you all realize, these things are extremely complex. At this, we're not going to bring closure to those here, but this is a platform also for a further exchange of individual experience and bilateral discussions, and hopefully you take home from this session some couple of ideas that may represent kind of points of traction for further development of evaluation capacity in your respective countries. And as an aid to that, the little diagnostic tool that we have cooking, we hope is going to be useful. So thank you very much to the panelists and to all the participants, and I hope you have a nice evening in Istanbul, and once again, thank you to all. A round of applause.